All right, so what's it going to take to stimulate the economy in the United States and turn the unemployment crisis around, lower unemployment rate? Well, we put together a Taking Stock think tank to give us some perspective. Christina Romer, President Obama's former chief economist. She is now professor of economics at the University of California and at Berkeley, also a Bloomberg contributing editor. Spent a lot of time focused on what caused the Great Depression and tax policy, an expert there. Also with Sean Egan, founder and president of Egan-Jones Ratings, one of the first people to point out that we were going to have a subprime mortgage crisis, and also Jerry Webman, chief economist at OppenheimerFunds. Good to have you all with us. Christina Romer, can you just kind of set the context for us? Because you spent a lot of time looking at the history of both monetary policy and fiscal policy and how that plays into countries coming out of a recession. What's the evidence show us about monetary policy, first of all?
I think that's such a good question, because I think all of these decisions should absolutely be based on the empirical evidence. And what the empirical evidence does show is certainly monetary policy has profound effects on the economy, even when the policy interest rate, the federal funds rate, is at zero as it is here. And so there certainly is strong evidence that monetary policy was very important during the recovery from the Great Depression, and strong evidence basically every post-war recovery monetary policy played a key role.
All right. Now, fiscal policy, let's start us off there, Christina Romer, because fiscal policy during the Great Depression, when government spending went up, they also raised taxes, didn't they?
Right. So the fiscal stimulus in the Great Depression was actually not nearly as big as most people think. The monetary side was actually much more dramatic. And you were right that part of that reason fiscal policy wasn't more important is because it was a mixture of spending increases and tax increases. But it's also that, as today, state and local governments were starting to have to cut back on their spending at the same time that Roosevelt was doing more. And so that lowered the overall fiscal impact. So it's not that fiscal policy couldn't have worked in the Great Depression, it just really wasn't tried on a very large scale.
Sean Egan, come in on the topic of what the president's going to say, because you make the point that a lot of the things that he's dealing with, he has no control over. Excess housing inventory, a crisis in Europe over his sovereign debt, and the demographic issue. People are just getting older, baby boomers.
Exactly. In fact, you could argue that he has a little control over also employment. What can he do in the next 8 months to significantly stimulate employment? It's not clear. In the case of Europe, I think it'd be helpful if he understood the problem and became proactive in the same way he's trying to be proactive on the unemployment problem. We are going to get involved in the European problem, whether we like it or not. We already see the impact on the European banks, on the American banks. We have an unlimited swap line to the ECB. You can rest assured that the U.S. will be involved one way or another. It already is through the IMF within the next 6 months in a major way, and it's nice to get ahead of it before the problem careens out of control.
Jerry Webman, should we just realize that, we need to buy a little bit of time here and that one person can't really do a whole lot?
Well, time is one of the things that is going to heal these wounds. If you look at consumer credit, for example, we got statistics this afternoon. It's beginning to expand a little bit. Some of this deleveraging simply has to be worked out. It is the first of the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And I think first doing no harm now means we don't tighten policy in this situation, fiscal or monetary.
All right. Christina Romer, come in a little bit on the situation having to do with demographics, because as Sean Egan mentions, this is a situation that is bigger than just President Obama. The baby boom generation is looking to retire. Their issues and their concerns about finance and where they're putting their money, that extends beyond just one speech. What are the ramifications there?
Well, certainly, I think the retirement of the baby boom is certainly a big part of what lies behind our long-run fiscal challenge, the rising health care spending and obviously rising Social Security spending. And so one of the things I'll be looking for in the president's speech is, does he pair a bold job creation plan with some very concrete proposals about how we're going to deal further with the long-run budget deficit? So first, how he's going to pay for these things, but also how do we go even further to deal with those demographic issues that do lie ahead of us. And I think that is an important part of this equation. It's really fundamental, and it's certainly something that the president has talked a lot about.
Jerry, it sounds like there are a confluence of events here. You've got the long-term issues having to do with the debt ceiling. We've dealt with that once. That's going to come up again. So increased U.S. budget deficits. But yet, as Christina Romer points out, you've got the issue of short-term stimulus. Is there a way to do both at the same time?
Well, you could probably produce, so the President's Commission gave us a reasonable way forward at the beginning of the year. Of course, everybody ignored it. There are reasonable ways to pursue both of these objectives. We need to keep some stimulus currently, to stimulate some growth, to keep growth in the shorter term, but that's got to come with a plan that addresses the long-term budgetary problems, and that includes entitlement. Look, I'm eligible for Social Security in 2 months. I admit it.
Not at all. You don't look that way, Jerry.
That's because Bloomberg has a great makeup department.
All right.
That's all it is. So, and I don't intend to take advantage of it. But boy, at some point, we're going to have to deal with the fact that people like me are going to want to work longer, are going to be able to work longer, and adjust these long-term entitlements accordingly. So we've got to do those two things. There is a long-term package that everybody will hate a little bit, but we've got to agree to. And I think there's some opportunity to keep some stimulus, maybe increase some stimulus in the short term on the fiscal. I'm not so sure about the monetary side. I'm more doubtful about that. But I think there are opportunities to do both.
Sean Egan, we haven't mentioned corporations. And, you know, as Megan Hughes from Bloomberg News was reporting earlier, Jeffrey Immelt, he's going to be sitting with the First Lady during the speech tonight.
Yes.
Corporations seem to be in a completely different world. They're doing well. How is it possible that we can have a whole corporate sector that's flush with profits, has a lot of cash? The treasurers have really protected themselves. They don't want to get caught short again.
Absolutely.
And yet the economy stumbles.
If we look at the upgrades versus downgrades domestically, the upgrades have far outweighed the downgrades for the simple reason that corporations are being very careful about spending cash, and when they do, they get a lot of leverage out of it, replacing basically technology, people with technology. And it's been terrific, actually. It's also been the case over the past 3 years that the country has been focused on recapitalizing the banks, and they've done a very good job of that. So all things considered, the U.S. is in fairly good shape despite the 9% unemployment, despite the fact that the stock market isn't doing terrifically. If you look at the individual corporations, operating earnings are up. It looks fairly good. The overhang is the 3+ years of housing inventory, and the problems, the thing that concerns us the most is whether or not the problems in Europe are going to be cauterized, whether or not they can get a handle on the sovereign crisis, minimize the damage, and recapitalize the banks in Europe.
Christina Romer, I want to give you the last 15 seconds here. Technology, it's driving unemployment up. That's nothing the president can really do to change that, can he?
You know, I think that's actually a small part of the problem. I actually think the main thing is we have a profound shortfall of demand, and that's really why the president is going to be talking tonight about more fiscal measures to try to get demand up. Everything from tax cuts to infrastructure to some really innovative things on unemployment insurance. All of that is to deal with a short-run problem, a short-run profound lack of demand.
I want to thank you all very much. Christina Romer, Jerry Webman, and Sean Egan.